Charleston, South Carolina. November 5, 1860, the night before America tore itself apart. Inside a white-columned mansion glowing with lamplight and laughter, the scent of roasted pork and expensive cigars drifts through the halls. The master of the house, Judge Alastair Penfield, is hosting an election night party, a celebration of Southern victory, he calls it. But beneath the clinking glasses and polished shoes, something foul brews. The enslaved are watching, listening, waiting, and among them stands one man, silent, tall, deliberate, Benjamin. His face unreadable, his hands steady as he pours another glass of bourbon for the judge, who boasts about the sanctity of property rights. But Benjamin's eyes keep flicking to the silver cigar case on the table. The judge's favorite. Imported, laced, though no one yet knows, with a death slower than truth. Hours later, after the last guest departs and the mansion falls quiet, the judge lights one final cigar to mark the coming dawn of his nation's future. He doesn't live to see it. By sunrise, Penfield's body is found twisted in his chair, lips blackened, lungs filled with ash and blood. The cigar burned clean through his fingers. His death is ruled divine punishment. But the servants whisper another story, one of vengeance carefully planned, wrapped in smoke, and lit by the hand of a man no one truly knew. They called it the cigar curse. The coroner's report was brief, too brief for what the townsfolk saw. They said the judge's eyes were open, pupils wide as if staring at something that shouldn't exist. His teeth were stained black, his tongue split down the middle. They buried him 2 days later without ceremony, under heavy rain that washed the cigar ash from the porch, but not from memory. The newspapers refused to print the story. They said it would cause unrest. The death of a man like Judge Penfield had to be respectable. But in the slave quarters, stories spread like smoke. Whispers about how Benjamin had been seen polishing the silver case days before, how he'd gone missing the morning after the death. Benjamin had always been different. Too quiet. Too observant. He could read, though no one admitted how he learned. He could write, too, and was often found alone near the tool shed, scribbling in a worn notebook he kept hidden under the floorboards. When they searched his quarters, the notebook was gone. But the overseer found something else, a small pouch filled with dried leaves and strange white powder. Witchcraft, they said. Voodoo, others whispered. But the old ones knew better. They said it wasn't magic, it was memory. A formula passed down in secret from those who remembered the islands, who knew how to make a man breathe in his own sin. And Benjamin, they said, was the last to remember. A week after the judge's burial, his eldest son, Thomas Penfield, returned from Columbia to settle the estate. The house smelled of mold and tobacco rot. Servants walked quietly, eyes lowered, as if the walls themselves listened. In the study, Thomas discovered a locked drawer in his father's mahogany desk. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, brittle, stained, and marked with the initials AP. On the surface, it appeared to be an account book, listing names and numbers. But as Thomas flipped through it, the ink grew darker, the handwriting more frantic. Each entry bore the name of a man or woman sold, the date of their sale, and beside it, a strange mark, a circle bisected by a line. Sometimes, in red ink, the word reclaimed. By candlelight, Thomas realized the final entry was dated the night of the party. It read, Benjamin, $0, returned to origin. The ink was still wet. No one could explain it. The clerk who handled slave papers swore no such transaction existed. But when Thomas sent word to search for Benjamin, the message returned unopened. The postmaster claimed the courier had vanished along the old marsh road. Horses found wandering, the letter burned to ash. That night, as Thomas sat alone in his father's study, the air filled with the faint scent of smoke. Not from a candle, not from the hearth. It was sweet, foreign, and thick. And on the desk, the ledger's last page had changed. A new line had appeared in smudged ink. Thomas, $0, next. By morning, the Penfield servants found Thomas screaming in the study. His hands were burned, not from fire, but from something that had left no flame, only blistered skin and the faint scent of tobacco. The ledger lay open before him, edges charred, words half erased by heat. He claimed it burst into smoke on its own. No one believed him, yet no one could deny the smell that clung to everything. Not the smell of cigars, but of lungs filled with soot. The local doctor bandaged Thomas's hands, and muttered something about hysteria. But that night, Thomas awoke to the crackle of paper. The ledger was back on his desk. Whole, clean, waiting. He tried to burn it again, dousing it with kerosene, tossing it into the fireplace. The flames turned blue, then green, then died. When he pulled it out, the book was untouched. But a new name had appeared in its final line. Eleanor Penfield, $0. Witness. His sister. Eleanor had returned home that same day from her convent in Savannah. She said the nuns had sent her away after she spoke of visions, of a man standing in smoke, whispering in a voice she couldn't forget. She said he asked her to remember the ones her father had erased. Thomas begged her to leave. She smiled faintly and said, "Benjamin won't let me." And as she spoke, the candles went out, all at once, with the quiet hiss of a match closing in water. In the days following Eleanor's return, the Penfield estate grew silent. Servants began disappearing without notice. Horses refused to approach the stables. The well water turned cloudy, tasting faintly of burnt wood. Eleanor spent her nights in the chapel at the far end of the property, a small, decaying structure her father had ordered built for the enslaved to pray away their sins. Inside, the air was damp and heavy with mold. The crucifix above the altar had blackened arms, as though scorched. Every night, she lit a single candle and prayed, not to God, but to the ones her father had silenced. Her lips moved slowly, reciting the same phrase she'd heard in her dreams. Ash remembers what fire forgets. Thomas watched her from the doorway, trembling. He didn't understand the words, but he felt something shift in the house whenever she spoke them. The timbers creaking like old lungs, the floorboards exhaling dust. On the fourth night, Eleanor found something beneath the chapel floor, a wooden box wrapped in cloth and sealed with wax. Inside lay a bundle of dried tobacco leaves, each etched with symbols. Beside them, a small scrap of paper with the name Benjamin written in a neat, unfamiliar hand. That night, she placed the leaves on the altar and lit them with her candle. The smoke rose slowly, curling toward the rafters like fingers reaching for heaven. And then, for just a moment, she swore she heard a man's voice whisper her name from within the smoke. It wasn't God's. By dawn, the chapel smelled of death and rain. The candle had burned itself into a puddle of wax, yet the tobacco leaves on the altar remained untouched, perfectly preserved, as though flame itself refused them. Eleanor locked the wooden box and carried it back to the mansion, hiding it beneath her bed. But the scent followed her, sweet, thick, and ancient, seeping into the curtains, her clothes, even her skin. Thomas begged her to destroy it. He said the smell made him see things, faces forming in the haze, eyes in the corners of mirrors. But Eleanor only replied, "If you destroy it, he'll start again." That night, she dreamt of Benjamin for the first time. He stood in a cotton field under a sky without stars. His hands were blackened, his chest rising and falling as if he'd been running for years. When he spoke, his voice came from all directions, the sound of wind moving through the hollow of a coffin. "They took everything," he said, "even the fire that freed us." Eleanor awoke gasping, her pillow damp with sweat, her window open though she remembered closing it. On the sill lay a single dried tobacco leaf, the same as those in the box, but this one bore her name carved faintly into its veins. She hid it inside her Bible. But when she opened the book the next morning, the leaf had turned to ash, leaving behind only a smear of soot in the shape of a fingerprint. And it was not hers. By midwinter, the mansion had begun to rot from within. Paint peeled in long strips like shedding skin. The mirrors fogged even when the fire was cold. Thomas no longer slept upstairs. He claimed the house breathed at night. He heard doors sigh, floors shift, whispers slide through the vents like smoke under a door. Eleanor tried to keep her mind anchored to prayer, but the image of Benjamin wouldn't leave her. She began sketching him on scraps of parchment. The same gaunt face, the same eyes that seemed to accuse even in silence. When she hung one near the staircase, the servants refused to pass beneath it. Then one evening, as Thomas shaved before a mirror in the washroom, he saw movement behind him. A shape, tall, thin, standing too close. He turned. No one was there. But on the glass, condensation formed the outline of a handprint, and 5 small burn marks appeared on his neck, as if pressed there by unseen fingers. He ran to Eleanor's room, shaking. "He's here," Thomas whispered. "Your ghost, your Benjamin." Eleanor did not look surprised. She simply rose, opened the tobacco box, and removed a single leaf. "He's not mine," she said softly. "He's our father's." That night, the mansion filled with the smell of cigars again, heavy, choking, and sweet. In the morning, every mirror in the house had cracked from corner to corner, splitting each reflection into two. And in every fractured piece, Benjamin's eyes stared back. The following night brought no sleep. The Penfield mansion groaned like a ship in storm, every plank sighing beneath invisible weight. Eleanor awoke to faint scraping sounds beneath her floorboards, a slow, deliberate rhythm, as though someone were writing with a nail against the wood. She rose, candle in hand, and knelt to listen. Between each scrape came a shallow breath. Not hers. By morning, she pried up one of the boards. Beneath the dust and cobwebs lay a thin layer of ash, perfectly smooth, as if someone had poured it there by hand. When she brushed it aside, she found words carved into the support beam below. "We still remember." She covered it quickly and said nothing to Thomas. But that evening, when she went to fetch her Bible, she found the page containing the Lord's Prayer had been torn out. In its place lay another tobacco leaf, folded neatly. Inside it, in small, careful letters, was written, "Memory is the only fire that never dies." That same night, the servants reported a smell coming from the basement, a thick, burning sweetness that clung to their throats. When Thomas forced open the cellar door, they found a shallow pit in the dirt floor. In it, blackened cigar ends, hundreds of them, arranged in the shape of a circle. And in the center of that circle rested the judge's silver cigar case, gleaming as if freshly polished. No one had touched it since the night he died. Thomas wanted to bury the silver cigar case at once, but Eleanor stopped him. "It's not meant to be buried," she said. "It's meant to finish." Her eyes had changed, darker now, pupils wide, as if she saw something moving just beyond sight. She gathered the servants and told them not to enter the basement again. "If you smell smoke," she said, "pray where you stand. Don't breathe. Don't speak." Her voice trembled when she said it, but no one dared question her. That night, Thomas couldn't resist. He went back down, lantern in hand, the air thick with the bitter scent of burnt sugar. The cigar case sat in the circle, untouched. He crouched to pick it up. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, a sound filled the cellar, a long, wet exhale, as though the earth itself had drawn breath. The lantern flickered, the shadows writhed. Smoke began to rise from the case. Not from within, from beneath it. It formed shapes, faces, hands, bodies pressed together in silence, all exhaling at once. For a heartbeat, he saw them. The ones from his father's ledger, their mouths open in endless inhale. Thomas staggered back, choking. The lantern dropped and shattered. The cellar plunged into darkness. When he clawed his way upstairs, gasping, Eleanor was waiting in the hall. She held the open ledger in her hands, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. "It's not the house he cursed," she whispered. "It's the blood." Eleanor spent that night at her father's desk, the ledger spread before her like a wound. Each page bled new words, names she didn't recognize, places long erased. She traced one line with trembling fingers, "Harriet, $0, returned by flame." The ink was still damp. She began to understand. The curse wasn't vengeance, it was record-keeping. Every injustice, every stolen name, every human body turned into property had been written into the book, and now, the book was writing back. At dawn, Thomas's condition worsened. His breath came ragged, as if the air had turned to smoke in his lungs. His skin smelled faintly of tobacco. He begged Eleanor to burn the ledger, but she couldn't. Some force held her hand steady. "Benjamin isn't haunting us," she said quietly. "He's restoring balance." Thomas cursed her, called her mad. But when he tried to flee the house, the doors would not open. Every window was nailed shut. By whom? No one knew. Outside, the fog hung low, thick and gray, swallowing the fields. From somewhere in that mist, a faint voice called Thomas's name. It wasn't Eleanor's. He pressed his face to the glass and saw a figure standing by the willow trees, tall, motionless, wearing the same coarse shirt Benjamin had worn the night of the party. Smoke drifted from his mouth like breath in winter air. Then the figure smiled. And in that moment, Thomas saw It wasn't a man at all. It was a shape made of ash, wearing Benjamin's memory like a mask. By the next morning, the Penfield mansion had sealed itself like a tomb. The air inside grew hot, thick, impossible to breathe. Windows fogged from the inside, and the wallpaper peeled back in curling strips as though the house itself were exhaling. Eleanor tried every door, every latch, all jammed. Thomas collapsed near the stairwell, his voice hoarse from coughing. "It's the smoke," he rasped. "It's alive." From the parlor came a soft crackle. Eleanor turned and saw the judge's portrait on the wall, the canvas blistering, paint bubbling away until only the eyes remained, glossy and dark. The smell of cigars filled the hall again, though no fire burned. And then came the whispers, faint at first, like wind through reeds, then clearer, dozens of voices layered atop one another, speaking names. Names from the ledger, names of the dead. Each syllable floated on smoke, curling through the house like scripture. Eleanor stumbled into the study, clutching the ledger to her chest. Its pages were now completely blackened, the ink burned into the paper. But between the layers, faint letters glowed. "He who smokes remembers." She dropped to her knees and begged Benjamin to stop. "What do you want?" she cried. From the fireplace came the faint glow of embers, though it hadn't been lit in days. And then a voice rose from within the chimney, deep and patient. "Not what? Who?" The coals flared red. The judge's cigar case slid across the floor, stopping at her feet. Eleanor's reflection flickered in the metal, but behind her, another face smiled. Eleanor froze, staring at the polished surface of the silver cigar case. The reflection shimmered, and for an instant, she saw her father, not as he'd been in life, but as he was in death. Mouth open, smoke trailing from his lips, eyes hollow. Behind him stood Benjamin, calm, hands folded as though waiting for something promised long ago. She slammed the case shut, but the reflection did not vanish. The metal pulsed, warm to the touch, heartbeat steady beneath her palms. Then came a sound, a slow inhale. Deep, measured, not her own. The fireplace erupted. Smoke billowed out in a sudden breath, sweeping through the study, wrapping around her like a shroud. Within it, she saw faces, dozens, hundreds, those who had died beneath her father's name. They moved toward her, eyes closed, mouths open, whispering through ash. "We remember." Eleanor screamed, stumbling backward, but her heel caught the edge of the rug. As she fell, the ledger burst into flames, pages burning without smoke, each line of ink glowing bright before dissolving into nothing. When she looked up, Benjamin was standing in the doorway. Or rather, something wearing Benjamin's outline, his body made of swirling gray, his features flickering in and out of shape. He spoke, his voice low and distant, the sound of breath drawn through firewood. "Your blood wrote the book," he said. "Now it must read itself." Eleanor clutched the cigar case to her chest, trembling. "If I open this," she whispered, "will it end?" Benjamin smiled, and for the first time, the smoke around him seemed to breathe. "No," he said. "It will begin." Eleanor opened the silver case. The moment the clasp clicked, the air in the mansion seemed to reverse, every draft pulling inward, as though the house itself inhaled. The walls groaned, windows quivered, and the air grew thick with that familiar scent, tobacco and decay. Inside the case lay 3 cigars, perfectly rolled, unlit. Their tips glowed faintly, as if remembering a flame that had never touched them. Eleanor could hear whispers coiled inside the smoke, voices overlapping, distant and broken, rising from a buried place. She understood now. Each cigar held a soul her father had condemned, a life he'd bought, traded, erased. The curse wasn't revenge. It was restitution. Benjamin stepped closer, his form wavering. "One for him," he said, pointing toward the portrait of Judge Penfield now smoldering on the wall. "One for you. One for me." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You want me to?" "To remember," Benjamin interrupted. "To finish what he began. Fire was their weapon. Let it become the record." The first cigar lit itself. The room filled with a low hum, like distant chanting. The faces in the smoke began to move faster, their mouths opening wider, their voices no longer whispering but singing. Thomas stumbled into the room, coughing violently. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice barely a rasp. "Put it out," he shouted. "You're feeding it." But it was too late. The smoke had shaped now, a spiral winding through the air, a funnel of memory and grief. And at its center, Benjamin's face began to dissolve, replaced by something older, something vast, the combined echo of every name ever written in the ledger. And they were all looking at her. The voices filled the mansion, not shouting, not weeping, but singing. A deep, ancient melody without language, carried through smoke so thick it turned the air to velvet. Each note throbbed through Eleanor's bones, vibrating the glass, shaking dust from the chandeliers. Thomas fell to his knees, clutching his chest. "Make it stop," he gasped. But Eleanor could barely hear him. The sound was not meant for ears, it was meant for memory. The walls of the study began to darken, streaks of soot spreading upward like veins. Portraits melted into faceless blurs. The judge's signature above the mantel flaked away, revealing older words carved beneath the plaster. Names, hundreds of them, written in a script neither English nor African, but something older, something that had survived both. Eleanor stepped closer to the spiral of smoke, the silver case still glowing in her hands. "What do you want from me?" she shouted. The answer came in 1,000 voices. To be seen. The floorboards cracked. From the spaces below rose gray hands, ghostly, translucent, reaching not to harm but to hold. Their touch was gentle, almost reverent. One hand brushed Eleanor's face, leaving a smear of ash shaped like a tear. Thomas tried to pull her away, but his skin began to blister where he touched her. His scream was swallowed by the chorus. And then, suddenly, silence. The smoke froze midair, the hands withdrew, and in that stillness, Eleanor heard one final whisper, calm, human, close. "Your blood keeps the record. Burn it, or we live in you." When the silence broke, the house began to breathe again, but slower this time. Heavier. Eleanor knelt beside her brother, his breathing shallow, his eyes red with soot. The house seemed to pulse around them, inhaling and exhaling with a slow, dreadful rhythm. From every vent and floorboard, faint trails of smoke seeped upward, curling through the air like veins under pale skin. She looked at her hands, streaked black, trembling. The silver case now lay open on the floor, its last cigar unlit. The other two had burned to ash without flame. Thomas clutched her sleeve. "End it," he whispered, "before it takes us, too." But Eleanor hesitated, for in the ash swirling around her, she saw shapes, faces she'd only ever glimpsed in the margins of her father's ledger. Children, mothers, men whose eyes still begged for light. They weren't monsters. They were memories, bound to the Penfield bloodline, waiting for release. Eleanor realized then, the curse wasn't in the smoke. It was in them. The family that had turned breath into ownership, humanity into ink. And the only way to end it was to unwrite what had been written, with blood. She took her father's letter opener, its handle shaped like a serpent, and drew a line across her palm. The blood welled dark, almost black in the candlelight. "Benjamin," she whispered, "if I give it back, will they rest?" The smoke shifted, forming his outline once more. His eyes glowed faintly, calm, sorrowful. "Rest is not ours," he said, "but remembrance is." She pressed her bleeding hand to the open page of the ledger. The ink hissed. The paper began to drink. The moment her blood touched the page, the book came alive. The paper rippled as if wind passed beneath it, and the ink began to move, letters writhing, shifting, rearranging into shapes she couldn't read. The smell of iron and smoke thickened until her vision blurred. Thomas crawled toward her, shouting her name, but his voice was distant, muffled by the humming that now filled the walls. From the ceiling drifted strands of ash like falling snow. Each flake glowed faintly before vanishing into her open wound. The ledger pulsed beneath her hand, beating in rhythm with her heart. The pages turned themselves, faster and faster, until it stopped on the first entry. It no longer read Alastair Penfield. It read Benjamin. And beneath his name, a new line appeared in blood-red script. "Freed by fire, remembered by name." Eleanor gasped. The house shuddered. From every wall came the muffled sound of breathing, hundreds of lungs exhaling at once. The windows burst inward, glass showering across the floor. Smoke poured through the openings like a living storm, rising in coils, forming a spiral above them. At its center stood Benjamin, not the figure of ash, but solid, whole, eyes dark as soil. He looked down at her, the faintest trace of mercy on his face. "You've written it back," he said. "Now it knows you." Eleanor tried to speak, but blood trickled from her lips. She looked at the page. Her name had appeared below Benjamin's. Eleanor Penfield, $0, witness. The ledger slammed shut. The room went black. And somewhere, deep beneath the floorboards, a single cigar lit itself. When the light returned, it came from nowhere, a dull, copper glow that filled the mansion as though the walls themselves had turned to embers. Everything was still. Dust hung in the air like frozen breath. Eleanor opened her eyes to find herself lying on the study floor. The ledger sat a few feet away, humming softly, its cover warm and pulsing like flesh. Thomas was nowhere to be seen. Only his coat remained, folded neatly over the back of a chair that hadn't been there moments ago. She stood shakily, the silence pressing against her ears. Then she realized it wasn't silence at all. It was breathing. Slow, collective, rhythmic. The entire house inhaling and exhaling as one. The portrait of her father began to move. His painted eyes blinked, the mouth twisting into a faint smirk. From his lips came a thread of smoke that drifted toward her, curling across the floor, wrapping around her ankles like a leash. "You've written us back," the voice said, layered with echoes, Benjamin's, her father's, and dozens more. Now the memory must have a body. Eleanor tried to run, but every door she reached turned to ash at her touch. Every window sealed itself with soot. She was trapped in the breath of the house, each inhale pulling her closer to the walls, each exhale filling her lungs with smoke that wasn't her own. When she screamed, her voice came out in two tones, her own and Benjamin's. And from somewhere deep within the mansion's ribs came a whisper, soft as smoke curling into heaven. "One breath left, and then we begin again." The walls trembled as the house drew its final inhale. The portrait split, faces peeling from the frames like dead skin. From every crack in the floor rose thin tendrils of gray, weaving through the air until the entire room pulsed like a single living lung. Eleanor fell to her knees. Her breath no longer belonged to her. It came in shallow bursts, synced with the rhythm of the walls. The ledger lay open again, pages fluttering without wind. Each name written there now glowed faintly, one by one, before fading into blankness. She understood what was happening. They weren't dying, they were leaving. The bound souls, the memories, the voices, they were passing through her, exhaling themselves back into the world. Every inhale she took drew one of them in. Every exhale released another. Benjamin stood in front of her, half made of light, half of shadow. "You gave them breath," he said. "Now you must keep breathing, or they will return." "I can't," she whispered. "It's too heavy." He reached for her hand, but his touch burned cold. "Then let the house breathe for you." The walls shuddered once more. A deep groan echoed through the beams, as if something enormous beneath the foundation had awoken. Flames did not rise, but the air grew red, the smoke luminous, painting the room in the color of dying suns. Eleanor's body lifted slightly from the floor. Her hair streamed upward, pulled by invisible air. The breath of the house filled her chest until her ribs creaked. And as she exhaled, her voice merged with Benjamin's. Together they said the words written into the heart of the ledger. "Ash remembers what fire forgets." The mansion began to collapse inward, not with noise or flame, but with silence. The walls folded like paper, vanishing into shadow as the smoke thickened and turned silver. The air became almost solid, heavy enough to press Eleanor to the floor, yet soft enough to cradle her like a mother's arms. Benjamin knelt beside her, his form flickering between life and memory. "It's almost done," he said. "The record is closing." Eleanor's vision blurred. Through the smoke she saw flashes, the plantation fields, the whips, the auctions, the chains. But she also saw the faces of those freed within the smoke. Children laughing, men kneeling, women singing. They weren't bound anymore. The curse had shifted, transformed from vengeance into release. The ledger floated between them, pages turning in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Every name now glowed with a faint ember, then went dark, one by one, until only two remained, Benjamin and Eleanor. He looked at her with eyes full of both gratitude and grief. "When the last name fades," he said, "we breathe our last." Eleanor nodded weakly, then let it fade. Benjamin smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but as a man finally at peace. He placed his hand over the page where their names burned. The ink began to blur, dissolve, vanish. The air shuddered as the house exhaled one final time, long and low, like a dying bellows. The silver cigar case fell from Eleanor's hand, striking the floor with a single, sharp note. And with that sound, the smoke withdrew. The mansion stood empty, hollow, clean, unmarked by ash. Only the faint scent of tobacco lingered, and the whisper of breath that was no longer there. Morning arrived as if the world had forgotten to notice. The fields around the old house were untouched, wet with dew, peaceful beneath the gold of dawn. No smoke rose from the chimneys. No laughter. No voices. Only wind through the trees, steady, indifferent. When the townsfolk came searching, they found the mansion door ajar, the air inside unnaturally still. The study was immaculate. No ledger, no blood, no sign of struggle. Only a faint layer of soot on the mantel, shaped like two hands folded together in prayer. They said Eleanor vanished sometime after the election party. Some swore they saw her carriage heading toward the river that night. Others claimed she never left the house at all. But no one could explain the smell of burnt cigars that clung to the place for decades after, or the way any candle lit within those walls would gutter and die, as though the air refused to feed the flame. The mansion was eventually torn down in 1912, yet workers whispered that when the foundation stone was lifted, a single brass cigar case was found beneath it, sealed shut, still warm to the touch. Inside was nothing but ash, and written in that ash, traced by an invisible hand, were the words, "Ash remembers what fire forgets." To this day, on certain election nights, locals say smoke drifts again across that empty field. They claim if you breathe it in, you can hear voices, calm, unbroken, breathing together in the dark. And somewhere within that breath, a man laughs softly, like a match struck in a room that shouldn't have air.